We've got Nick discussing what's been going on with current updates with the Iran war.
Anyway, we're going to move on. We are going to get it. What is this show even about? Sometimes people on Instagram say, what does he even talk about on the show? Because they see the clips and they're like, what is this show even? Is this like about politics? Is it political? I guess. Anyway, we're going to get into our news. Our featured story is all about the war in Iran. And it is just brutal. This is some seriously depressing stuff. They're like undoing the Persian Wars here. So the big development, we're at day 164 in our war with Iran. Nothing has happened. You might remember about a week and a half ago, Trump said that we were canceling our offensive against Iran to make room for a peace deal. He said that we were negotiating with Iran, that a new agreement was imminent. And they even said it less than a week ago. They said this last Tuesday. Last Tuesday, Treasury Department said that last Wednesday, there was a forthcoming deal with Iran to open up the strait. What we have now established after last week is that all of that is a lie. We had a 2-week offensive against Iran. It was scheduled to escalate. Trump actually gave the order. Not this Saturday that just passed, but the week before, we were set to escalate the war with Iran and strike them harder than we were even striking them at the beginning of the war, when we hit them 13,000 times in 6 weeks. Trump teased it would be the biggest U.S. airstrike since World War II. You might remember that Trump called off the strike because he said that Iran begged us to, and so we reluctantly, mercifully agreed to negotiate with them. And days later, Trump administration said the talks were going really well, and we actually had something like the parameters or framework for a deal. Well, we have now established since all of this, and we went over all this last week, that the real reason we called off the strike, the real reason we stopped our offensive against Iran is because we are too weak. That's literally it. We are too weak. Our allies begged us not to because they know we can't protect them. Our generals begged us not to because they know we don't have enough ammunition to do it even if we wanted to. Our generals begged us not to because they told the president there is nothing we can do militarily to Iran that will change their calculus. There's no way we can increase our leverage. We are not getting any concessions. They hold all the cards, and no matter what we do, they're not going to budge. And so that Iran begged us to stop was a lie. They didn't beg us to stop. There was no overture from Iran. That we were giving diplomacy a chance, we are begging Iran to negotiate. Iran is giving us an ultimatum. And not only did Iran not beg us for mercy, the shoe's on the other foot. In reality, we are hoping and praying that Iran will stop the war for our sake because we're running out of weapons. We're running out of oil. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve just hit a 50-year low. It dropped below 300 million barrels for the first time since they started filling it in 1983 under the Reagan administration. Now, the latest development in the conflict today, based on all of this, is that now Iran has finally begun to set the terms. And Iran's foreign ministry came out today and they said, we are done talking to Washington. We're never talking to Washington again. Iran said, we are not talking to the U.S. until Trump is out of office in 2029. Iran said they very well may reach an agreement with Oman about how the Strait of Hormuz will be governed, but Iran said we're still not opening it. So in other words, even though Oman is collaborating with the United States in their negotiations with Iran to figure out the terms of how Hormuz will be governed in the future, Iran says that is independent of the conflict. Iran says we very well may reach an understanding with Oman about how the strait opens and under what conditions and what the fee will be and where the ships are actually going to transit, whose territorial waters. Iran says, but that is independent from the war. Iran says because even if we reach an agreement, the strait will remain closed. And Iran is now putting forth their ultimatum. Iran is telling the Trump administration, we're not negotiating. We might come to an agreement with Oman, but if you want the strait to open, these are our demands. And Iran says they want the U.S. blockade over Iran's ports to end immediately. They want us to pay Iran restitution for the damage we inflicted during the war. They want us to relieve them of the sanctions on their oil. They want us potentially to unfreeze hundreds of billions of dollars in assets, and they want us to move all of our U.S. military assets out of the Persian Gulf and away from Iran in the broader region. And Iran says if they don't get all of this, then the strait doesn't open. And they're not negotiating, they're not talking to us. That's an ultimatum. So this is a story. This is from the New York Times. It says, quote, Iran said on Monday that any deal with Oman on shipping in the Strait of Hormuz would not lead to the waterway being fully reopened, and that the route would remain closed until the United States agreed to demands including lifting a naval blockade. Esmail Bagay, the spokesman for the Iranian Foreign Ministry, said at a news conference on Monday that the focus of the talks with Oman was, quote, on reaching an understanding over a route for the safe passage of shipping. His comments echoed remarks by Abbas Araghchi, Iran's foreign minister, who said on Saturday that Iran and Oman were very close to an agreement, but that reopening the strait was contingent on other conditions. The U.S. and Iran are not negotiating directly, although Secretary of State Marco Rubio said last week that the talks between Iran and Oman were being conducted with American input. Last week, a top Iranian national security official issued a set of demands that are part of Iran's longstanding public negotiating stance, and that the United States, or in that he said the United States must meet before Tehran would fully reopen the waterway.
And this is the thing, Araghchi's made it perfectly clear that they can't and they won't negotiate with America. He even said no more disrespect, no more threats. It's not going to happen like.
Those included the lifting of the U.S. naval blockade and sanctions on Iran, the withdrawal of American forces from around the country, payment of war reparations, the release of frozen Iranian assets, and the end of attacks on Iran's allies in the region, which would be Hezbollah and the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq and the Houthis in Yemen. So Iran is giving us an ultimatum and saying the strait doesn't open until we give them everything they want. Now, is that their actual position?
Yes.
Possibly. That could also be Iran starting with you could say they're lowballing us. They're sending out these maximalist demands in the hopes that the United States will beg Iran for mercy, and Iran is going to see how much they can get. We've effectively given them the strait. Now it's a question of how much else are we going to give them? So is that a real negotiating tactic, or is that their real position? That's one question. And I think that surely Tehran must understand that they cannot push their luck, and that they're almost certainly not going to get all of that. They're not.
How can they not push their luck? They've stood firm. America run out of munitions, like you've said, Nick. How can that is their position?
Not going to get all their unfrozen money. They're not going to get sanctions relief on everything. I think at the minimum, the United States, it might not even be possible for them to maintain U.S. military outposts near Iran, because many of them have been destroyed. So the United States might consider that a foregone conclusion, and we're going to say, well, we were going to move these bases anyway. Maybe they'll get that. Iran is going to get the Strait of Hormuz. The United States, more likely than not, will try to compel Israel to cease their incursion in Lebanon. You can throw that in there. And so I think when all is said and done, maybe that is part of the framework of a U.S. capitulation, is that Iran will control inbound traffic in the strait. They'll have some say over outbound shipping. There's going to be a fee. I think that some U.S. bases that are near Iran will permanently close, and I think it will be done in a way that is face-saving for the United States. I imagine that Iran will get their sanctions waivers, and this will be branded as an economic boon to the United States. If Iran is able to sell their oil, well, then the supply of oil goes up and the price goes down. And I'm sure that the United States will continue to try to force Israel into a ceasefire or some kind of settlement with the Lebanese government and withdraw from some of their positions on the ground. If there's going to be a deal, I imagine those are going to be the contours of it. And those are the kinds of things the United States might be willing to compromise on. And I think the things they're less willing to compromise on are the frozen assets and the sanctions. Because economic pressure is the only card that we really have to play. We have our blockade of the Strait. We have our blockade of Iran's ports in the Persian Gulf. Obviously, any deal that opens the Strait would have to be reciprocal, so that's not going to be a long-term tool. But if we're going to maintain any pressure, if there's going to be any kind of pain mechanism or a stick, a disincentive against Iran, it's going to be the sanctions regime. It's going to be the sanctions regime. It is going to be in some form taking their frozen assets and effectively stealing them. We have their hundreds of billions of dollars frozen at institutions across the world, and the U.S. government will begin seizing them to pay ourselves back for the conflict. And that might be a punitive measure we could take against Iran. So I think if there's going to be a U.S. capitulation, there's going to be a lot of things we're going to give up on, and some things I think are less likely. The question, though, now is that the ball is in the U.S. and Israel's court. And let's talk a little bit about the United States. Obviously, the United States wants out of the conflict, and we're being forced out. We cannot go on for those two reasons we've talked about before. The war cannot go on because we need the oil. We simply have to have as much energy in the world as possible right now because there's a major crunch on energy in the world. We need abundant energy to power AI, and AI is fueling our economic growth. We also need to keep oil and energy prices down to keep overall prices down. This is part of our way out of stagflation, which we've been in for a long time now since the pandemic. So it's an economic necessity that we end the war expeditiously. There's also the military aspect of it. We simply lack the supplies, the materiel to prosecute the war. We don't have any standoff munitions, these ATACMS and Tomahawk missiles. These are offensive weapons that we can launch at a safe distance, that Iran can't hit us back, basically. We're out of those, 100% out of these ATACMS weapon systems, mostly out of Tomahawk missiles. And then famously, we're also out of the defensive systems too. The THAAD system, Patriot missile batteries, we're out of interceptors for these as well. And this is because we have been defending so many targets in so many countries for such a long period of time against this onslaught of Iranian drones and missiles. We are now having to make decisions about where and when to prioritize defense and where and when we're going to let Iranian projectiles actually hit their targets.
And just a note on that, NATO are defenseless. Asia is defenseless. They've took all the resources from these other places to send them to protect Israel. It is what it is. That's why the Yemenis, the Houthis are getting through in Saudi, because there's no Pac 2s and Pac 3s left. And just listen to what Ted Pistol, the MIT expert on munitions, has been saying for weeks now. The intercept rate's like 3%. These missiles are $3 million to $4 million each. China control the rare earth minerals that make these missiles. How much is a Shahed drone? $50,000? Do the maths, man. Come on.
What's more, we talked about this too, Iran's missiles are getting more sophisticated. Their targeting is improved because of help from Russia, and they're more maneuverable in the terminal phase of the missile's launch sequence. And so as the missile is heading for its target, it's actually able to evade in a smart way our defensive systems, which not only makes the missiles more deadly, but also makes it less economical for us to intercept. If we're launching interceptors and not hitting drones and missiles, it means we're expending more ammunition per drone, per missile launched at us. Major problem. So we need to end the war expeditiously because we're running out of oil in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to offset this energy crunch. 300 million barrels left. This is after we've coordinated the release of 400 million barrels worldwide. We pumped a bunch of oil into the economy. And then there's the military part of the equation, which is we just don't have the ammunition. And again, what's more, let's say even if we had the offensive and defensive capabilities, even still, It wouldn't be enough because we simply cannot suppress Iran's ability to control traffic in the Strait. And what you must understand is that this is a very particular problem. The Strait is so narrow. It's about 8-9 miles long where the ships actually go through. And so it does not require a ton of precision from Iran's huge coastline or its many islands to hit a ship. You can launch a drone, you can hit it with artillery, you can hit it with an anti-ship missile from the islands, from the coast, from the interior of the country, and you're 100% going to hit a ship. And all you need to do is be able to hit a ship every now and then, which causes the insurance on those ships to skyrocket, which means the ships are going to be trapped in the Strait. And so the task before us is either we have to destroy the Iranian regime, which we failed to do, or we prevent Iran from launching a drone or a missile or any kind of projectile from anywhere in their country, which is a third the size of the United States. So good luck finding every small platform where they're launching these very tiny drones, every platform where they're launching a missile.
And I know Nick's America first and he likes to try and spin it. But just listen to what he's saying. America have lost, like.
Which is in a car, behind a bush, or shoulder-mounted weapon. It's impossible to prevent all the missile strikes, intercept all the missiles. It's just never going to happen. And then, of course, the other timeline that we're on, which is maybe the least impactful, is that we got the midterms coming up. And all of that then affects the midterms. The status of the military campaign from a tactical or strategic point of view, and then, of course, the effects on the economy. This weighs politically on the Republicans who are in power, and it's going to be very close. In the House, we're going to get blown out, and in the Senate, we might lose that chamber as well. So for the United States, it is imperative that we leave. It's simply a must. We cannot go on economically, militarily, politically. The war was already unpopular. It's more unpopular every day. The war is causing inflation to go up and gas prices to remain high. That will become far more acute in a couple of months. And then from a military point of view, that's costing us money. And we're just simply not having an effect. So we are being pushed out of it. And what I've said basically from the start is that Iran knows this. Iran is deeply aware of this. Just as I am and just as you are, we have internet access and so do they. They have better intelligence probably than even we do because Iran has spies and Iran gets intelligence from Russia and China. This is increasingly becoming a world war. There was a exchange of fire between Ukraine and Iran a couple of weeks ago. And so Iran knows very well the military, economic, and political problems that we're facing, and this is why they're pressing their advantage. They sense weakness. They know we can't stick it out. They know that time is on their side. And they know that they are in a position to make these demands. This is why they're now giving us the ultimatum. This is why they are attacking us offensively. That's why even after Trump suspended his attacks on Iran, Iran continued attacking Jordan. And that's why, Iran ordered their proxies in Iraq and in Yemen to continue attacking Saudi Arabia. They are now taking the fight to us. They are initiating. They are now going to control the timing and the tempo of the fighting. It's happening on their terms. And now they're going to dictate to us the terms of surrender. Since they have us trapped by closing the strait, and since they're pushing us out of the conflict, now we are actually having to pay a toll to open up the strait. They're telling us, you want us to open the bear trap? You want to be freed because you're stuck? You're going to have to pay up. You're going to have to give restitution, unfreeze the sanctions, unfreeze the frozen assets, end your blockade, move your military out of the region, end the conflict in Lebanon. This is what they are, and ultimately give them the Strait of Hormuz. This is what they're asking for. And the United States, I think, in a vacuum, might be willing to give. Like I said, I think that if we were in a vacuum, if Iran and the United States and the Gulf, If these were the only players involved, I think the war would end and the contours of the deal would look like what I said. The Gulf countries don't want to fight, and this is a problem because the Gulf is what we're using as a platform to attack Iran. Saudi Arabia wants out because they are getting obliterated by rockets from Iran's proxies. They want out. And Saudi Arabia knows the more that they assist the United States, the more they collaborate, the harder they're going to get hit. They'll be held liable. Qatar, they were out a long time ago. Qatar cut a deal with Iran at the very beginning in order for Iran not to target Qatar's desalination and liquefied natural gas facilities. Qatar cut a deal with Iran and said that if Qatar stopped producing LNG, if they slowed the rate of production of liquefied natural gas, which would hurt the U.S. economy, of course, limiting production raises prices, then Iran would not attack their infrastructure. In other words, Qatar said, we'll help Iran pressure the United States by voluntarily hurting the energy market so that Iran doesn't have to bomb the infrastructure and irreparably damage the energy infrastructure to reduce the global supply of energy. So Qatar was out a long time ago. Saudi Arabia arguably was never in. They were always reluctant to let us use their airspace or use their airstrips or to host our military forces. So the Gulf, they're no longer an accomplice. They want out. The U.S. needs to get out. Iran, I think they want a reprieve from the fighting, but they're telling us the terms under which that's going to be satisfying to them. The wild card is always Israel. This is why I say in a vacuum. And I said this from the very beginning. Israel is driving all. Let us not forget how we got here. Did this start on February 27th? No. Did it start on June 13th? No. Did it start on January 20th last year? No. This started on October 7th, 2023. And if you're paying attention, if you watch the show for years, you already know what I'm going to say. After October 7th, Israel vowed that ultimately they were going to begin a quest that would lead to the eventual decisive confrontation with Iran and decapitation of their regime. They call this the octopus strategy. They're going after all of Iran's tentacles, which is Hamas in Gaza, Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the West Bank, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Assad regime in Syria, the Houthis in Yemen, the PMF in Iraq, and then ultimately they're going to have to confront Iran decisively. And that's been the mission. And so after October 7th, they used that as a justification to eradicate Hamas and to raid the West Bank. And because Hezbollah was bombing Israel to divert Israel's resources away from their invasion of Gaza, Israel used that as the pretext to launch a full-scale attack on Hezbollah in Lebanon. It was the pager attack on their command, control, and communications, followed by thousands of airstrikes, then the ground incursion. Shortly after that, the Assad regime mysteriously vanished overnight in December of 2024. And Assad became a refugee to Russia. Now, the new al-Qaeda regime in Syria wants to make peace with Israel and is allowing Israel to basically invade southern Syria. Israel launched major airstrikes on the Houthis in Yemen. And now that the path has been cleared, now that these proximate threats to Israel's security on their border have been neutralized, now Israel has been freed up. They don't have to worry about Hamas. They don't have to worry about Hezbollah. Don't have to worry about Syria. Don't have to worry about the Houthis. Now that all of these proxies have been defeated in detail, systematically confronted piecemeal, one by one by one, and temporarily put down or paralyzed, now Israel is freed up, and with their ally in the White House, Trump, now they're able to confront Iran. And this is it. This is the big idea. This is what it's really all about. That if they can achieve regime change in Iran, then they have regional domination. And with regional domination, then they can meaningfully eradicate the proxies on their border because they no longer have patronage from Iran. With Iran out of the picture, the lifeline, that umbilical cord that replenishes and resupplies, the proxies will be permanently cut. And then Israel can meaningfully eradicate Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the militias in Iraq. They can eradicate all these threats, and then they can expand in every direction. They can take Gaza and send the Palestinians packing to Morocco, Somalia, and Libya. They can take the West Bank and push the people out. They can take southern Lebanon. They can take southern Syria, annex the Druze territory in southern Syria. Maybe they take the Sinai Peninsula. They make Saudi Arabia bow to them. They make Syria bow to them. This is the goal. This is the end game. And so why is this relevant? Well, because we did not stumble into a conflict with Iran. We were dragged into one by Israel as part of this larger agenda. And it's important to understand this because you realize that Israel, not Iran, not the United States, but Israel has actually orchestrated. They have controlled the tempo, the pace, all the terms of engagement have been set by Israel. Why did the United States bomb Iran last year? Because Israel bombed them first. When our negotiations were deemed to be too slow or lacking progress by Israel, Israel took the initiative and launched a surprise attack on Iran, dragging us into the fight 12 days later. Same story here. Months before February 27th, Netanyahu visited Mar-a-Lago and implored Trump to go back to war with Iran to degrade their missiles and further degrade their nuclear infrastructure. And then in February, Netanyahu told Trump, we're going in whether you come with us or not, just as we did a year ago. Israel said we are going to take advantage of the crisis in Iran, the run on the bank, the uprisings that are going on, the soft Kurdish invasion from the West, and Israel is going to launch another offensive, dragging the United States in. So why is this relevant? It is to understand that how and when the war ends, it's not up to Iran, and it's not up to the United States, and it's not up to Saudi Arabia or the other Gulf countries. It is up to Israel, because Israel is in the driver's seat of all of this. Israel drives the United States. Israel catalyzes events in the Middle East. They force countries to act in ways maybe they ordinarily wouldn't, because Israel knows how to provoke, and they have the art of deception. In 2024, Israel killed 7 IRGC commanders in Syria, which provoked Iran into attacking them. Israel assassinated the leader of Hamas in Tehran in July of 2024, provoking Iran to retaliate. A week before the Memorandum of Understanding was passed in June, Israel attacked Beirut, where Hezbollah is headquartered, after Iran explicitly warned them that if they did that, Iran would retaliate and break the fragile ceasefire. So every step of the way for years, under the Biden administration, under the Trump administration, you see Israel's fingerprints over every escalatory act. Every time there was a fork for us to escalate or de-escalate, there is Israel putting their finger on the scale and tipping us in favor of escalation. Every single time. You can see it throughout. April 24, July 24, April 2025. Trump announced negotiations with Iran a week after Liberation Day with the tariffs. The following day, Netanyahu said the only deal Israel will accept is if we blow up Iran's nuclear program. We had the ceasefire in April of this year, April 8th this year, a year to the day after the fact. Trump said we have a ceasefire if Iran opens the strait. Iran said, well, we need a peace in Lebanon. Israel said, say no more. They killed 1,000 Lebanese the next day. Every step of the way, there they are. Whether we're negotiating, whether we're at war, whether we're at peace, they drive the events. So why is this relevant for this? Well, it's obvious. The U.S. and Iran are fighting themselves to exhaustion. I would actually amend that. The U.S. and its Gulf allies are fighting Iran to exhaustion. Iran is exhausted. Their economy is being damaged to the tune of $350 billion from our blockade against their ports. We assassinated half their leadership. Their economy is in true peril. The Gulf countries are reeling from all the attacks on their infrastructure. The U.S. has depleted its munitions. 15 of our bases are severely damaged. Our economy is experiencing stagflation because of the high gas prices, inflation ticking back up. Kevin Warsh won't cut rates any further. So we are all finding ourselves to exhaustion. It appears that a deal is emerging because of this, which reflects the reality of the situation. And so question mark is not what America will accept and what Iran will accept, it's what Israel will accept. And what Israel has been telegraphing for weeks is that they're going to escalate with or without us. That is what they have been telegraphing. And so simultaneously in the news, you see Israel, or rather Iran is saying they're preparing for a preemptive attack by Israel without the United States. In Iranian media today, they're saying they're preparing for Israel to launch a major offensive with or without the U.S. Israel says the same thing. When the U.S. began its 2-week punitive campaign against Iran for violating the MOU, Israel would not get involved because their minister said, well, we don't want to have anything to do with this contained fighting. We want an uncontained fight. We want a war without limits. And what are the limitations? No assassinations, no attacks on energy. So when Israel says we want no part of a limited contained campaign, they're saying we want an uncontained, unlimited campaign. Okay, what are the limits? Well, the limits are very clear from the White House since the beginning. When Israel attacked the southern Pars gas fields in Iran, and Iran retaliated by attacking energy in the Gulf, the U.S. apologized to Iran and said that will never happen again and admonished Israel. Israel will attack Iran's energy. And when Iran was trying to kill, or rather when Israel was trying to kill Iran's negotiators, the foreign minister and the speaker of the parliament, Arakshi and Halibaf, Trump privately warned Iran through the Arab mediators that Israel was preparing to do this. That's the other limitation. No limit, no strategic limits means Israel wants to attack Iran's energy to destabilize the regime, and they want to continue to assassinate the personnel to destabilize the regime. And the United States does not want to totally destabilize Iran. The United States does not want Iran and the Gulf to destroy all of each other's energy infrastructure and irreversibly destroy the energy supply in the Middle East. But this is what Israel is seeking. And what's the other timeline? The other timeline is that Netanyahu is facing re-election on October 27th, and he's very vulnerable and very unpopular. That's something like 3 months away, a little bit less than 3 months away. And it's going to be a referendum on what Netanyahu can do vis-a-vis Lebanon and Iran. Netanyahu, in order to keep power, is going to need to demonstrate that everything that he has done has been worth the price. Israel has isolated itself from the world. They have ruined relations with Europe. They have alienated the American public. They've created enmity, not just between Israel and the Democrats, but also between Israel and the Republicans, which is truly remarkable. Israel has galvanized all of their previous allies in the region to become enemies and actually normalize relations with Iran, countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt and others. And so for Netanyahu to survive, he's going to need to demonstrate that this immense cost to Israel's reputation and diplomatic standing was worth it. And what would make it worth it? One of two things. Netanyahu is either going to need a real victory against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and he can say, I have made our northern border secure by creating a security buffer zone in southern Lebanon. I've meaningfully eliminated or defeated Hezbollah, and as such, all of those civilian populations that live on the northern border can resettle there because they were displaced from the fighting. That's one victory condition. Another victory condition is that Netanyahu can decapitate the Iranian regime or demonstrate that he's winning against the Iranian regime, which means the war, at the minimum, has to still be going on. At the minimum, he needs the war, and he needs us in the war, and he needs to be winning. Ideally, he'd like to topple the Iranian regime. So those are the goals that Netanyahu has to stay in power before October 27th. And if you're a student of all this and you're paying attention, you're going to realize there's a really big problem with these two goals. which is one, the U.S. does not want to continue the war with Iran. So it's going to be very hard for Israel to keep the war up with Iran without the United States involved, because we don't want any part of it. And put simply, we cannot keep the war going for another 3 months. That's a problem. So you say, well, Netanyahu will keep fighting in Lebanon. Well, Iran has inconveniently conditioned a peace with the United States on a peace in Lebanon. For Iran to open the strait and to have a meaningful peace with Washington, Iran insists the condition for this, the precondition, is that the U.S. must stop Israel in Lebanon.
That was Article 1 of the MOU.
So in other words, for the U.S. to achieve their goals, get out of the war, Iran is going to need us to stop fighting them and to get Israel to stop fighting Lebanon. So for us to win, we have to thwart and frustrate Netanyahu's two goals, his two and/or imperatives to win the election. For us to win, we need to shut the war in Iran down and shut the war in Lebanon down. For Netanyahu to win, he needs us to be fighting in Iran, and he needs to keep the fighting going in Lebanon. And/or. So it puts us on a collision course with Israel. So what conclusions can we draw? Well, we have to look at the imperatives. I don't go by vibes. I don't say, well, it seems like. I don't go off of what Barak Ravid reports in Axios or what's reported in Reuters, where every week they say it's looking like there's progress on a deal. Talks were described as constructive by those briefed on the discussions. I don't go off of that either. I don't go off of a feeling. I don't go off my gut. I don't go off of what is being said on True Social by Trump or in Axios by Barak Ravid to manipulate the oil markets. I always go back to these strategic imperatives. And Iran's strategic imperative is they need the strait and they need us to get Israel to stop in Lebanon. They need us to move out of the region. So they're going to make peace very costly. Our imperatives is we have to end the war, but do so in such a way that is face-saving, and we can't have an unconditional surrender. So Iran's imposing a heavy cost. We're reluctant to meet them where they are, although it's not impossible. Israel's imperative is they need the war going by any means necessary. And what that means is they must sabotage peace. They must catalyze conflict. They must provoke both countries into escalation. And they do this all the time. They've done it all. How have they done it? I'll give you these examples, like I just said before. April 24, when Israel needed a confrontation with Iran, they killed a bunch of Iranians in Syria and made Iran bomb them. In July 24, Mossad infiltrated Tehran and assassinated Hamas's political leader on the inauguration day of Iran's new president, Pezeshkian, provoking Iran to retaliate. When the U.S. announced negotiations, Netanyahu went on TV and said, well, the only deal we'll accept is if we blow up Iran. When the deadline for the negotiations expired, Netanyahu launched a war against Iran without telling us. It goes on and on and on like this. This year, same story. With the peace agreement, with the MOU. The day the MOU was going to be signed, I believe on June 16th, it was a Sunday. The day the MOU was supposed to be signed, Israel bombed Beirut again, demanding a response from Iran. The whole thing almost unraveled all over again. So if Iran is going to make a deal, it's going to come at a heavy cost. If America makes a deal with Iran, we're going to drag our feet. We're going to exhaust every possible remedy for this, and it's going to take time, and we're going to be reluctant to do it. Even if we're somehow able to achieve a deal, which will be extremely difficult because Iran won't even talk to us, and they're not going to give any concessions, and it's going to be very humiliating for us. Even if we get it across the finish line, Israel is going to unravel it. Israel will sabotage it. And this leads me to the other big story, which is very concerning.
And then he just gets into the deal between Iran and Oman. And this is the thing, like, it always leads back to Netanyahu and the Zionists. They want the Greater Israel Project, and like Nick has laid out well there, like you say, I don't always agree with Nick, but on this issue, he's right, like, but the one thing he overlooks, like, Iran know they need a deterrent for the future. They need the bases gone. Because they know for a fact, whoever's in charge in America, Israel will convince them to go back to war. Israel will not stop until Iran is a failed state like Syria or Iraq was, and it takes them decades to recover. But that's it for this one anyway.